Thank you very much, Joe. As Adam mentioned, we are at a pivot point in our series, becoming more like Jesus for ourselves, but in the context of community. And the text that our focus for this part of their series comes from is also at a bit of a pivot point in his letter. As Adam and Joe have said, Paul is talking about that we have been saved by the grace of Jesus, and in view of this, we're called to unity with Jesus. And in this letter, Paul has just prayed what Joe has shared with us. So it's in view of this that he brings this imperative for us today, that we walk this calling with all humility and gentleness. Now, this room is full of some of the most humble and gentle people that I know. So we get this. But hopefully this message will be one of an encouragement for us to turn up the dial a little and avoid some of the traps that prevent us from becoming truly humble and gentle. I've taken some inspiration from our tree image we have for our series here today. So we've been invited to look at where we might be on the journey in the image of a tree. We are all at different stages, and we're all in different seasons. We might be different kinds of trees, but we're all trees. And so if we were all trees, and then in this room, and I've probably got the best view actually, you're a forest. Yeah, that's a pretty nice one too. So come with me to a story that takes place in a forest. So it's a fable, actually. And it's one from my childhood. Many of you may know it, but if you don't, I'll recap it quickly. It's the story of some animals in a forest, and the hare, who is very boastful, challenges the tortoise to a race. And all the other animal friends are quite excited about this race, and they help tortoise get ready. The race day comes, and tortoise goes off slow, and hare zooms off. But hare, thinking that he's got this, he accepts hospitality along the way, and he doesn't have a nap. And he wakes up just in time to see that tortoise has won the race. Now, there are a number of morals in this story, and I'm not disputing any of them or putting down any of the wisdom that's in this beloved fable. But I wanted to use it because I think it's a scenario not too dissimilar to the world we live in, the world that demands we run a fast race. And I think it paints well the traps that we can fall into when we think about humility and gentleness. So, unpacking this story, I don't really need to tell you that the hare is not humble. He's so self-centered, he doesn't see the abilities in other people. And he's usually depicted as being quite rude, so not at all gentle. He puts down tortoise. We might say that hare has fallen into the trap of blindness. Now, tortoise, he's often portrayed as the hero of the story. He's held up into high esteem because he persevered and he won the race. But I wonder if he is actually humble and gentle. He is aware of his abilities. He says, I'm not fast. And he is slow. We sometimes equate gentleness with slowness, not always. But I wonder if he was actually really gentle with himself, in that he undertook such a huge task that he probably wasn't built for. As the race finishes, tortoise is depicted as being really victorious, but he's also pretty exhausted. So I wonder, and I would probably say that he's actually misunderstood his own finiteness. And what of the crowds? Yes, they are encouraging of tortoise, but are they humble? They've got their own agenda here. See, they're tired of hearing tortoise boast. And when he picks a fight with tortoise, they think, great, this is a chance to put hare in his place. So they convince tortoise that he can do this. They offer hospitality along the way to the hare, but I wonder if that's actually being kind and gentle, or it's actually their own agenda of trying to skew the race. I think perhaps the crowds have misunderstood the role they could have played in keeping the peace of the forest. So yes, these are personified creatures and we're human. But it's those human characteristics that I think in part is the point I want to bring across here. Before we jump into the word, I think it's important to underscore a definition here of humility, because I think the definition of humility is tied up in humanness. So humility comes from humilis, meaning on the ground in the Latin, which comes from humus, meaning the earth. And we see a similar thing in the Hebrew. And you will recognise from our creation stories, man being created from the ground. And it's probably where we get the term down to earth. Being humble is to be human and not of God, or not God. So being humans, let's turn to our Bible. Now, we're a bit spoilt for choice in the Bible with regards to examples of humility and gentleness and of pride. So I'm just going to touch on 3 stories that I think illustrate some of those traps that's come out of the story of the tortoise and the hare as well. In John 9, we read the story of Jesus healing a man who has been blind from birth. And instead of humility, the response from the people around him, instead of humility that this amazing thing has happened and praise to God, we see them questioning 3 times, how? How did this happen? Because it took place on the Sabbath. Now, there's a fair agenda here. The questioners want everyone to be faithful to God's command of Sabbath keeping. But unfortunately, they're so locked in this situation to the framework of what Sabbath keeping would look like that they were blind to what actually was in front of them, a revelation of God from the God they love. Now, here's the challenge for us. Just because we live this side of the resurrection and we accept Jesus as God, and for many of us who've been walking with Jesus for a long time, just because that is true doesn't mean we have the full picture. So being humble is to recognise we don't have the full picture. Being humble means to recognise we have blind spots, and if we're honest, complete blindness in some ways. And at risk of insulting your intelligence, if this wasn't true, you'd be saying you are God, omniscient, all-knowing. Humility says we don't know it all, and God might reveal himself in ways that we're not expecting. And in fact, it's probably some of those unexpected, unwanted changes that we come across, that these can be invitations from him to discard some of our layers and become more like him. Tortoise struggled with his finiteness, and I know I do. If there's tasks to be done, I find it really hard to sit still. In Exodus, we read of God's people who are commanded to rest on the 7th day as a day holy to the Lord. God wanted his people to model what he did for them, what he modelled in creation, to rest. After God rescued his people from slavery in Egypt, he had to retrain them to be dependent on him for manna bread and quail, and to ingrain the idea that they need not be enslaved to work every day. Because it's in not being bonded to slavery, as in the lack of rest, that their humanity would be restored. So the challenge for us today is to recognise the way in which we fall into ignoring our own finiteness. And in doing so, overtly or not, we express an attitude of not needing God's provision. And I'm not going to pretend that slavery doesn't occur in Australia, because it does, but in many ways, I think we're all slaves to the demands of the world that we run a fast race. The pressures to accumulate our wealth, our status, clothes, cars, degrees, they're real. And if we're not careful, the endless pursuit of those will exhaust us and will own us. Fear is definitely real. But I think we would do well to recognise that a lot of the fear that we face is manufactured, is advertised by the world that says, you don't have enough. You won't have enough. You aren't enough. And it's this fear that we're sold that drives us to ignore the limits of our finiteness. And it's not just work and in keeping up with the neighbours that we can ignore our finiteness. You don't need me to tell you that we live in a highly distracting world. Our phones are constantly binging. The 24-hour news cycles are going. Every second of our attention is being distracted by other things. In the face of this, humility is what it is to be not turned on all the time. It's not to have to access, not to be across everything that's happening in the world because we're not in charge of it. Humility says we need rest and a calendar with margins, and we need time without our distractions. The final story I'll touch on is, I think, next to the cross, epitomises who Jesus was and who he calls us to be. It's Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And you can read about it in John 13. The story takes mid-place during a meal, so it's not just hospitality, it's Jesus teaching his disciples a lesson that they must serve, yes, but they must also be served. Peter's response to this is, "No way, you will never wash my feet." And Jesus responds simply, "You can't have a share in my kingdom if you don't let me wash your feet." And afterwards, Jesus says, "I've done this as an example to show you what you have. I've done this as an example. Do as I have done for you." Now, I don't think many of us have much of an issue with serving. I know there are many faithful servers in this room. And while there's always more room for volunteers on rosters and in different places, yeah, I know you get the idea of serving very well. And I would even go so far as to say a lot of you are quite happy serving in some of the unpleasant places, such as it was for this task of Jesus, the task for the lowest of the lowest slave. But I think we're also a lot like Peter. We're pretty averse to being served ourselves. I think our biggest challenge is that we're more comfortable serving than being served. Yet Jesus asks us to do both. So I wanted to sit in this uncomfortable space for a little bit, because I think to fully reckon with what it is to be humble and gentle in a community, we need to understand what's going on inside of us when we don't want to be served. One of my favourite writers, Graham Joseph Hill, proposes a number of reasons as to why we're more comfortable serving than being served. He puts it like this: it's number one, pride. So receiving puts us into that lower position. The admission of need can feel like a failure, especially in our culture that worships self-sufficiency and independence. The exchange instinct. If someone serves us, we feel like we owe them. Control. When you're the server, you are totally in control of the situation. You decide what to give, when and how, but when you're being served, you're not in control. You're vulnerable. You're receiving on the terms of somebody else. And the deepest part may be that suspicion that we're not worthy. It's a quiet voice that says, "I'm not worth this kind of attention. Other people need it more than me." I struggle with all of these, so if any of those touched you, you're in good company. I'm also very super thankful that there are so many people in this room that have humbled me, reminded me that it's okay to be carried, and carried me in times even when I didn't need it. Didn't think I needed it. I needed it, for sure. In a society that worships independence, humility says we are made for connection with one another. And we know Christians don't have a monopoly on this. Social scientists will tell us we need relationships with one another. But what we do have is a mandate from Jesus that we love one another. We serve and we are served. And that's the way that he desires that we share his message to the world. And this is what our Ephesians passage is getting at. with all humility and gentleness, be unified in our collective calling to Jesus. In our lead up to Easter this year, we learnt about the upside down kingdom of Jesus. And on Maundy Thursday in particular, we were invited to turn the crown upside down. So knowing this upside down kingdom of Jesus, knowing his humility and gentleness, my question for you is, how might we subvert the story of the tortoise and the hare? And then how might we, in the real story of our world, our community, subvert the traps of blindness, subvert the traps of ignoring our finiteness, and subvert misunderstandings about needing each other? How would you turn the story upside down? For the tortoise and the hare, instead of blindness, hare might learn more about tortoise. In letting tortoise carry him, he might develop a great admiration for tortoise's strength. Hare might get a better view of the world. And tortoise would be valued for his uniqueness. Instead of endless exertion, tortoise might take a ride in the wheelbarrow that hare is going to push. He might enjoy the surrounds instead of racing past them. And, tortoise, I've got the wrong character in my head there. All right. Perhaps the biggest subversion of the story for the tortoise and the hare, it might be for them to realise that the story is actually not a race to be won, and it's not an attempt to outdo one another, but it's the road is a journey. It's a journey towards Jesus. And no matter how long it takes to get to the finish line, the point of the story is actually that they do it together. And instead of getting what they want, the crowds might watch and see how the tortoise and the hare learn to hop, skip and jump along the road together. They might wonder at this really weird picture of two completely different animals having fun together and not seeing life as a race or a competition of winners and losers, of getting your own way, but of encouraging one another in a life that's a journey of togetherness. This is the aim for us too. Jesus, not long after washing the disciples' feet, highlighted that this was the point of serving and being served. It would witness to the world his love. We had a different slide. Oh, good. We'll finish up there. How do we walk this path of love? Walk the calling to Jesus, to unity, with all humility and gentleness. So I talked through a few ideas as I went, but I want to finish with 3 suggestions. And I wouldn't be practicing what I'm preaching if I said these were the only things, yeah? You're creative and you've got ideas too. Why not over tea and coffee today share with one another how you think we might be able to subvert the traps of blindness, subvert the traps of ignoring our finiteness, and to get more comfortable being served without neglecting our call to serve one another. One way to subvert the threat of blindness is to get to know one another. So why not invite someone you don't know from this room or don't know them very well, invite them to share a meal with them together. When you come across a different view, experiences, just pause and just see it. Approach it with a gentle curiosity. Learn to sit in the tension. The aim here is not to extract information from one another or boast about yourself. It's to just sit and marvel at the diversity, the beauty of our diversity, in whichever way you want to describe it. To remind ourselves that we're all different expressions of God. Humility will reach out to connect to others, but do this with a gentleness, yeah? A gentleness that doesn't chase or blame people if they don't accept. We all respect each other's boundaries, but a vision for how we walk the road together presupposes that we do know each other. So get to know one another. Finiteness. We already talked about the value of rest and time out from devices. So a quick word on gentleness, because sometimes we don't choose the humbling experiences of finiteness. they come to us in really painful ways. And it's in these seasons of being humbled, realizing our finiteness, that gentleness can carry us. Gentleness is what we give each other when we face upheaval. Gentleness is lowering the expectations of our capacities and that of others. It's resisting the urge to fix. It's resisting the urge to give advice. It's sitting with others and holding them in their grief, in their change, in their questions. In what ways can we express our need for others? For me, these past few weeks, it's actually been going back to prayer, reaching out for prayer. It's really simple. You can do it with the person beside you after church today, up the back, or at prayer@essendonbaptist.org.au. You don't have to reveal all the details in this. A simple, I would appreciate prayer today it's enough to break that bond of pride that says you don't need help. And it gifts someone else with the opportunity to serve. And it puts God in his rightful place as the only one who can actually bring supernatural change. To share a meal, sit and pray were sort of some things that I've sat with this week. What are your ways in which we could subvert those traps? So finally, just some of these things might seem like work and things for us to do. But as we started with in the beginning of our series, it's the Spirit that will do this work. Our job is to make room in our schedules, our hearts, so that we can live worthy of our calling. Let me pray for us. Jesus, we thank you for the ways you have demonstrated humility and gentleness to us. We know becoming more like you will be the journey we travel our whole lives. Help us through your Spirit to become a community that is more like you. Help us to subvert the traps of blindness so that we may be ready to see your vision for the world. Help us to recognize our finiteness, and in doing so, let you do what you do best. And help us to fully grasp the dance of serving and being served so that our love for one another would grow, and that through this love, we would reveal your love to the world. Amen.